Namaste and welcome to all. Today's short talk focuses on the fascinating and quite intricate topic of music of the spheres. Due to limited time, we will touch upon some core interesting concepts which will help the students to later continue in their own study. The doctrine of Pythagoras regards the music of spheres and imagines the cosmos as a giant musical instrument. Each celestial body, the moon, the planets, the sun, and the distant stars, occupy a concentric sphere around Earth. The distances between these spheres correspond to musical intervals. In other words, the spacing of the planets produces a cosmic scale, with each adjacent pair of heavenly bodies separated by a specific musical interval. When summed together, these intervals form a complete harmonious scale called the diapason, the octave, or the universal harmony. It is on the number 7 that Pythagoras composed the harmony and music of the spheres, and with reference to SD 2601, we have this table which maps the various tones into a visual scale of 8 celestial spheres. Earth at the center, up to the fixed stars at the outermost level. Each step outward from Earth is labeled with its corresponding musical interval, tone, or a fraction of tone. Together, these 7 successive intervals add up to the 7-tone diapason harmony. Now, this is the same idea which was also captured in the cosmography manuscript of the 12th century. As seen, we have the harmony of the spheres mentioned above, and below we have the planetary orbits. Now, as per the joint research which has been conducted by Johns Hopkins University, Finnish Geospatial Research Institute, and Italian National Research Council, today's science agrees that musical consonances are pleasing tones and that harmoniously interrelate or are interrelated when sounded together, and the orbits of the planets of our solar system form a particular kind of gravitationally optimized and coordinated structure, or rather self organized state, which suggests some kind of higher intelligence, which science is not able to determine. And these self organized gravitational structures lead to harmonic resonance between sun, moon, and the planets. And these relationships, as per the study, are based on a ratio of 9 by 8 multiple by powers of 2, which corresponds to the musical interval of Pythagorean epoch Dune. As per science, it is the gravitational or tidal process leading to this harmonic resonance. However, we will see shortly that it is much more than that. But before that, as a first step, we need to have clarity in understanding the actual motion of sun along with the planets in the space. In the next slide, we see the 3D view of the same in the animation. Here, we can observe that each planet is revolving on its own axis, which is aligned at a particular degree, and then the entire plane of the solar system itself is inclined or tilted with respect to the galaxy at a 60.2 degree, and the sun itself is moving in a direction with the planets revolving around, causing a spiral path. But we may ask the question, is our sun moving around something, Because if we really see, it is the sun which is dragging the planets around itself, and the planets are moving around the sun, creating a spiral path in this particular journey. So it seems that the sun is actually moving around something else. And as you can see in this animation, it is scientifically proved that this indeed is the case. Now, the next slide provides some clue in the same direction. Here we see that S1 is our sun, the center of our solar system, which is moving around another sun or another center unknown, and we label it as S2, which in turn moves around another unknown sun S3. And these are mentioned in the secret doctrine as the first three systemic suns, the S1, S2, and S3. And S3 in turn moves around a star Alcyon as a center, which is part of the Pleiades constellation. So further, we see that Alcyon itself is moving around the unknown center of all, which we call it as the central spiritual sun. However, the important thing to note is that with regard to our solar system, Alcyon will be equivalent to our spiritual sun. And we see in SD2552 that the Pleiades and Alcyon especially are considered even in astronomy as the central point around which our solar system or universe of fixed stars revolves, the focus from which and into which the divine breath, the motion, works incessantly during the Manvantra. Further, the secret doctrine teaches us that everything in the universe, as well as the universe itself, is formed, created during its periodical manifestations by accelerated motion, set into activity by the breath of the ever to be unknown power. Here, in this context, we see that S1, S2, S3, the systemic suns, getting, in fact, they are getting the influence via the central spiritual sun. So the influence or the impulse is being pumped by the central spiritual sun, and it reaches Alcyon. From there, it reaches S3 and then S2 and then comes to S1. However, this influence or the impulse is being tweaked, altered, or filtered at each level, because at each station the frequency of that impulse seems to be changing. In this context, we can refer to SD2 page 240. Now further, let's keep at the back of our minds that all this which we just discussed is happening with reference to the sevenfold cosmos, and we can think of the influence or the impulse coming on seven planes. Now, let's not forget that our plane, or rather on our plane, we are receiving seven rays of the sun as mentioned in SD1515. Hence, same might be the case for other planes too. So, in effect, there will be 49 rays of the sun in total. Other way to understand this is that when the ray passes through a Laya point, it splits into seven subrays on that particular plane. As also mentioned in SD2239, it's the central sun which is emitting the creative light, and we see on the same reference page that the esoteric philosophy states that the central sun emits creative light passively, so to say. It is only during the active periods of being that it gives rise to a stream of ceaseless energy, whose vibrating currents acquire more activity and potency with every rung of the heptomatic ladder of being which they descend. And in this context, Science has also confirmed that our sun's magnetic field, in fact, goes through a cycle, and this cycle is known as the solar cycle. So, every 11 years or so, the sun's magnetic field completely flips. This means that the sun's north and south poles switch. Then it takes another 11 years for the sun's north and south poles to flip back again. So we see different phases of sun. Also, the solar energy is manifestation of Vishnu as mentioned in SD1112, where it states that in India, Fohath is connected with Vishnu and Surya. The name Vishnu is from the root vish to pervade, and Fohath is called the pervader and manufacturer because he shapes the atoms from crude material. In the sacred texts of Rig Veda, Vishnu also is a manifestation of solar energy, and he is described as striding through the seven regions of the universe in three steps. So here we see this 11-year cycle which keeps repeating, and the sun is like a heart pumping the vital energy through our system. So each Laya point becomes a kind of a interface for this energy to be passed on. Then further, we see in SD1663 that atoms are called vibrations and sound in occultism. It is by their continuous vibration that motion keeps the wheels of life perpetually going and also produces the correlation of forces. We should note that these atoms mentioned here are not atoms of science, but they are the atom on the highest level existing on the physical plane, and they are referred to as Anu. Next, we also see that or know that Parabrahm is in short the collective aggregate of cosmos in its infinity and eternity. In this context, we need to keep in mind that everything in the universe, the cosmos, is actually sevenfold, including us, and the whole is a copy of parts, and the parts a copy of whole on each of the seven planes and further on their subdivisions. So, in a way, everything reflects everything and is related and connected to everything. Further, all previous slides which we discussed can be applied simultaneously to these 49 levels. Now, how do we understand all this? In the next slide, we see how each globe on page 200 diagram is in fact a copy of the whole. And then each part of the subpart or subsystem of a particular globe is further the copy of the whole. And we can go in this manner 7 levels deep in each, which makes a total of 7 into 7, 49 levels. So whatever we discussed in previous slides need to be actually visualized on a 49 scale or 49 levels. But let's not forget that everything is in coordination and not in consubstantiality with our earth, and thus pertain to quite another state of consciousness. So even the fractal nature or of each plane would be considered different due to the dimensions and nature of different planes. Now, next, let's see what's happening from the perspective of our states of consciousness. Here is an interesting verse from an ancient book, Vedasara Shivastotram, which states that all the three states of our consciousness, that is, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, periodically arise and they subside. And this is happening in the fourth state, which is labeled as Turiya. So this means that Turiya is the fourth state, is the basis or rather substratum of all the other three states. Now, If we were to map these three states of consciousness to page 200 diagram, then we see that waking state maps to the physical world, and dream to the substantial, the deep sleep to the intellectual or creative, and fourth, the Turiya state to the archetypal world. Now, in this context, Kabbalah, as has mentioned, as described on page 432, volume 1, we see that there are three lights. We have the objective light, we have the reflective light, and we have the abstract light. Now, all these three are actually interpenetrated by the fourth light. And if we were to take this idea further and map this to the previous slides which we had, then we can see that the objective light actually maps to or relates to waking, reflected to dream, abstract to deep sleep, and the interpenetrating light is actually mapping to your Turiya state. So, in this direction, if we take a step further, then we see that each level is also having a Laya point or a transition point from wherein the influence of the sun traverses, and it gets actually tweaked or filtered, altered according to the particular plane. Even this process can be viewed at 49 levels. Each time the influence gets tweaked, it provides specific correlations of forces peculiar to that particular plane. That is the sons of Fohath. Now, applying the idea of Nada Brahma, we see that Turiya corresponds to the Paravak, deep sleep to Pashyati Vak, dream to Madhyama Vak, and waking state corresponds to the Vaikari Vak. Now, every picture similar to what we are seeing can be understood and approached in 7 different ways, as HPB has mentioned. And this is possibly one of the potential ways in which we can understand these ideas. However, students can work out different approaches in order to understand in much depth the same idea. Now, next we see that there is an interesting statement mentioned in SD1 5 to 7, which states as follows. Let us remember that this ether, whether Akasha is meant by the term or its lower principle, ether is septenary. Akasha is Aditi in the allegory and the mother of Martanda, the sun, Deva Matri, the mother of the gods. In the solar system, the sun is her buddhi and vahana, the vehicle. Hence, the sixth principle in cosmos. All the suns are the Kamarupa of Akasha, and so is ours. It is only when regarded as an individual entity in his own kingdom that Surya, the sun, in the seventh becomes the seventh principle of the great body of matter. So, with another perspective, we can also associate sun with Brahma, the third logos, Mahat, or the Laya point. Now, if we take this a level further, and if we see the flow of life wave of the sun at the cosmic level, we will see it as visualized as here. And we can observe here that with respect to Akasha in our solar system, the sun is her buddhi and vahana, the vehicle, hence the sixth principle. However, at the level of cosmos, it is the Kamarupa. Now we need to note that every logoi is again sevenfold. In one sense, if we really see, it is in fact only one logos which is being expressed in various states, which are the unmanifested or rather unmanifested state, and it moves on to manifesting state, and then it moves on to the manifested state, and so on and so forth. So, how do we understand this? Let's take a plant. In the plant, there is a potential bud. that potential bud becomes the bud, and that bud becomes the flower. So it is the same potential bud which is expressing or expresses itself in various forms. So is the case with logos. Hence, we see that the creative light is akin to Nada or Shabda Brahma, which is same as your creative sound or Vak or Shakina, and this is nothing but the music of spheres. To all this, we can further add a level of complexity or another level of dimension. Now, as per the esoteric writings of T. Subbarao, we have the material universe, which is represented by a dodecahedron, and each side maps to a particular zodiac sign. So each side of a dodecahedron is a pentagon, which maps to a particular zodiac sign. And the astral world or universe is represented by icosahedron. And further, we have the octahedron, the cube, and the tetrahedron in that particular order. And all the five platonic solids are actually enclosed in a sphere with a center. Now, if we were to draw this on a plain paper, the surface of the paper would represent the silence or the absolute beingness. But how do we understand all these platonic solids in totality, and what's the relationship with them? In the next slide, we see in this particular animation how all these five platonic solids are interrelated and connected with each other, and how all of them sort of fit in the spatial dimension with each other. Now, the important point to note here is that in this particular animation, we are not showing these five platonic solids enclosed in a sphere, but in reality, we can observe or visualize all these platonic solids enclosed in a sphere and having a particular center. So, how do we apply all these ideas to our life in a practical manner? We know that the one absolute has two aspects: absolute abstract space and absolute abstract motion. Also, the Parabrahm is symbolized by a circle. Now, in this context, let us consider the abstract formula. The center is everywhere and nowhere. The circumference is everywhere and nowhere. Based on this, we can derive certain few concrete formulas. The first one being, wherever there is a center, there is an associated circumference, and wherever there is a circumference, there is an associated center. Formula 2 is each center is a circumference for a smaller center, and each circumference is a center for a larger circumference. Hence, they are interconnected. Circle and center are fractal images of each other. And one potential example is as given in SD138. The Ahi, Dhyan Chauhans, are the collective host of spiritual beings. This hierarchy of spiritual beings, through which the universal mind comes into action, is like an army. each with its separate individuality or life and its limited freedom of action and limited responsibilities, each contained in a larger individuality to which its own interests are subservient, and each containing lesser individualities in itself. Taking this idea further, we can also conceptualize Formula 3, which states that each center is associated with a frequency, and the influence of that frequency is the circumference, which also implies that centers align when their frequency aligns, and in this way they harmonize. This means that all the centers and circumferences are contained in the absolute abstract container, the absolute abstract space, which itself has its frequency, and we can label it as the frequency of that, and the center, the central spiritual sun. So, from this perspective, we can say that all centers are based on the fundamental frequency of that. And we can further say that we all have a center, our heart, and its circumference is its limited influence. Now, an important thing which we should also keep in mind is that the astral light is continuously being colored by our thoughts. Based on our thoughts, there is a continuous ebb and flow of electromagnetic radiation known as magnetic respiration, which surrounds us in the astral light where our reflections are kept. These reflections continuously influence our thoughts, and it is thus that we become and we remain the child of our own works and progeny. Hence, the importance of right thought, speech, and action. In the next slide, if we consider the substratum, the parabrahma, and visualize it with an infinite circle with a center that is same as the monadum, the potential white point in this context, we see in SD1615 that space is the real world, while our world is an artificial one. It is the one unity throughout its infinitude, in its bottomless depths, as on its inclusive surface, a surface studded with countless phenomenal universes, systems, and mirage like worlds. Nevertheless, to the Eastern occultist, who is an objective idealist at the bottom in the real world, which is a unity of forces, there is a connection of all matter in the plenum. As Leibniz would say, this is symbolized in the Pythagorean triangle. And now, regarding the Pythagorean triangle, we see the diagram in the next slide, wherein the occult and Pythagorean geometry takes or states the tetrad as combined with itself all the materials from the cosmos and is one unity. So the point or the one point extends the line, the two align to a superficies, and three the superficies, the triad or triangle, which is converted into solid, the tetrad or the four. And by the point being placed on the top. So we see that we have four levels, and each level can be associated or mapped to a monad, duad, triad, and the tetrad. And in this context, we need to also understand that the Pythagorean Tetraktys was revered by the Platonist and was the square placed below the triangle, as mentioned in Isis, to page 49, volume 2, wherein it says that the Pythagorean Tetraktys, revered by the Platonist, was the square placed below the triangle, the latter or the trinity embodying the invisible monad, the unity, and deemed too sacred to be pronounced except within the walls of the sanctuary. And further using this particular Pythagorean triangle, we can determine the triangular number series, the square and oblong number series, Plato's Timaean lambda with harmonic series, the lambdoma, and various other things. In fact, the whole harmonics of music can be derived from the same. And this in itself is a very huge topic, and we will not cover this at this moment. So, coming back to our previous thought, we see that every mathematical point in this monadum is a conscious center, a monad, an individual, and the final point which cannot be divided any further, and it becomes the vanishing point. So, in this way, various other centers are subsets or part of this infinite ultimate circle. Each such center is an evolving center. Each subset can be an individual, a planet, a subsystem, a solar system, a cosmos, a galaxy, and so on and so forth. So here we again see the fractal nature, and we have the one ray differentiating into millions of rays, the monads, eventually. However, eventually there needs to be harmony. Thus, we see that each such center needs to harmonize with that, the one center, and become one with all. Similarly, we can understand that we have our center as the heart. The universe has its center as the sun. The cosmos, its center as a central spiritual sun. Each cell has its center. Each organ has its center. And harmony is attained in aligning our frequencies by degrees to the frequency of that, the central spiritual sun. Aligning our heart center with that. So we may ask this question that how do we align to that frequency? In the next slide, we see how the musicians can create harmony in music. And similarly, we need to first figure out the key in which we are and assemble our particular chords, match our chords with the target notes, and add some color. So applying this to our life, we see as a step one, we need to figure out where our thoughts are focused. That is, what is our frequency, which means what is the line of our life meditation, what is the focus. And then as a step two, we need to assemble our thoughts, self-introspect, be mindful and self-aware, and we need to take the witness position. As a step three, we need to match, attune, align our thoughts with the highest possible thought we can think of, the eternal harmony, thus becoming a vibrating antakaranic entity. And as the step four, what we need to do is we need to, in real time, always be mindful, self-aware, alert, keep a check, and fine-tune our thoughts continuously to harmonize with the frequency of compassion based on the acquired wisdom. Hence, for it to practically work for us, this harmonization needs to be practiced continuously with the eternal harmony, that is that frequency. We see a very interesting and encouraging statement in SD1639, which states as follows: for with every effort of will toward purification and unity, the with and the self God, One of the lower rays breaks, and spiritual entity of man is drawn higher and ever higher to the ray that supersedes the first, until from ray to ray, the inner man is drawn into the one and highest beam of the parent sun. And that is what we need to work towards. So, the process of attunement is as follows. The three fragments of voice of silence deals with the three aspects, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. And then we have the seven portals mentioned. Now, each portal, as mentioned in the voice of silence, is associated with a particular sound and a particular parameter. But we should remember that before that path is entered, we must destroy the lunar, cleanse our mind body, and make clean our heart. In this context, we need to understand that manas is actually dual. The lower, the lunar descending and pulled by kama, our selfish nature, the higher the solar, attracted and elevated in its highest aspect by buddhi, selfless in nature. The lower and the higher mind can be actually then thought of as connected via a sevenfold path known as Antahkarna. It is said that thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself. Therefore, we have the seven parameters, the seven initiations, the seven sounds, and the seven portals. The gradual purification of mind by performance of our duties in life in an unattached manner, as the Bhagavad Gita teaches, killing desire and ambition, killing likes and dislikes, by generating paramitas and by constant devotion to the higher self, we will lead to gradual unfoldment of this path. Finally, when all the sounds, portals, and parameters are aligned to that frequency in us, then we have the six forces of nature, the six planes, principles, etc., etc., all synthesized by the seventh or the central point in the star. In its unity, primordial light is the seventh or highest principle. Devi Prakriti, the light of the unmanifested Logos. Hence, we finally attune ourselves with the whole and become one with all. Thank you very much.